materials. Thank you very much, Tijana. And I would like to call the speakers of the next session. So we have Janez, Zavasnik, Michel, Cathelineau. You can come on stage and take a seat. Marc, Henrio, we have Chen, and also Kerstin, Forsberg. Okay, please come on stage and take a seat. So you can all sit. Okay, you just start and
is there any sitting?
No, yes, we can sit.
You can take a seat, guys. You have the screen here. You have a clicker. You have microphones. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable discussion on the topic raw materials for the green and digital transitions. We are all aware of the transition toward low carbon economy and digitalization of our lives. This transition is one of the European Commission's long-term priorities, and it aims to transform our society and economy, addressing important challenges like climate change and need for technological progress. The twin transition requires us to use renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and hydropower in place of fuel gases and which have adverse effects on the environment. At the same time, digital and green products requires a significant amounts of raw materials, particularly very rare and critical ones. Extraction and processing of these materials also can have a negative environmental impact, which we have to recognize and reduce to enable our well-being for the future. Together with our distinguished panel of experts, we will try, from academia, industry, and civil sector, we will try to shed lights on this complex issue. My name is TijanaVulevic. I'm, as Alexander say, associate professor, and I will be moderating this session. Today we have an impressive panel with very diverse profiles. We have Chen, assistant professor at the University of Southern Denmark. Also Michel Cathelineau is a professor at the University of Lorraine and partnership director of Ressources 21 Laboratory of Excellence. Also here is Kerstin Forsberg, an associate professor at the Swedish KTH Royal Institute of Technology. Also Marc Henrio, who recently graduated at MineLens, and he works as a solution analysis for McKinsey and Company in Belgium. Also here we have Janez Zavasnik, who is an associate professor at the Jozef Stefan Institute from Slovenia. First of all, I would like to remind that before metals, they are minerals, and I would like to ask Janez Zavasnik to tell us more about this. Thank you, Janez.
Hi, thanks. So, yeah, thank you. It will be a pleasure to break the ice on this first session on the raw materials, right? So, as I understood, we are here from the many different backgrounds, right? So I will make a very general introduction into the world of the minerals. Myself, I have a background in crystallography, but my professional life, I work with the transmission electron microscopes. So as a mineral collector, for me, minerals are a nice way to avoid synthesis in the laboratory. I can just go up and dig them, my samples from the nature, right? So when we are talking about the... Oh, okay. So, yeah, thank you. So when we are talking about the minerals, right? So the most basic, how we can distinguish them are like the basic separation is the metal and non-metallic mineral resources, right? Non-metallic resources are very versatile, right? They are composed of like fuels like coal, petroleum. Then there are very basic mineral resources like gravel, sand, rock salt, mica, clay, right? All the way to the fertilizer minerals that we need for the agriculture, right? So basically all our way of life is built around the mineral resources. So some of these non-metallic mineral resources are very rudimentary, right? We use them as they are, like gravel and sand, or we have to just shape them like limestone or granite, and we can use them as a construction materials, right? So others are more energy demanding, like we heard about the production of gypsum into plaster, or cement industry, which is there were different agendas already starting how to reduce the CO2 intensity of kind of reprocessing these minerals. But we use very large amounts of these resources, right? Roughly, we need about 10 tons per person per year of this non-metallic mineral resources, which is like a huge amount. So that's why we have to have in mind that also we need that minerals, not just the metals. But luckily, the non-metallic minerals are quite uniformly distributed over the world surface, right? So they are most of them, they are pretty easy available to us. So they don't present much conflict over them. But this is not the case of the metals, right? So the large deposits of metallic minerals are pretty rare, at least in the quantities that would be economically justified to explore. We will hear more about it later on, right? So, and I believe that each of these large accumulations should be treated as an anomaly, usually beneficial one, and it's pretty unique. We have a standard association of metallic minerals, but each of such deposit is a kind of interplay of the Earth history and different associations, and also of political issues where this accumulation lies. For instance, it will be pretty impossible to start a new underground mine somewhere in Europe, or while we have such a deposit in global south, this would be easier to start extracting it. The other thing is that it takes quite a long time to start such a mining operation. Usually it takes several decades to start the industrial production, extraction of metallic minerals. And usually we plan the extraction for several decades, right? So, but the demand can change quite quickly. Especially we heard about that we need a fast development and shift, which also usually needs a demand of different materials. If we learn from the history, well, we start playing with metals about like 7,000 BC with the copper, usually native copper, and it took us about 2,000 years to optimize the process from the copper, which is a pretty bad material for the tools, to bronze, which was a significant leap forward, but it took us 2,000 years. And then again, it took several millennia to shift from bronze to steel, right? Now this can happen in the matter of months. And the extraction of metallic minerals, it's a kind of a huge ship. It's going there for hundreds of years. We are exploring it, and it's hard. We have to predict what will be the metals and that we will need in maybe 10, 15, 30, 100 years to try to optimize what we will start to explore. I'm a bit long, but maybe I can just show this on an example, right? I bring with myself a nice specimen from when I was finishing university. I was working in the Mežica underground mine. This is on the border between Slovenia and Austria. And it has a continuous operation of about 400 years, right? So it's one of this, oh, it's a nice zoom. Okay, good, thank you. I will try to find a nice, this is a nice wolfenite crystal. So lead molybdenum oxide, and the gray stuff on the other side is a piece of galena. So the deposit type is one of the Mississippi Valley type, is a zinc lead deposit with some minor other metals. But for the first several hundred years, here people were producing iron just from the iron oxides of the mine. And it was just at the time of Napoleon, the Illyrian provinces, that they start producing lead, and exclusively lead, because the demand for the war efforts were quite high and the lead was in the demand. So they were producing lead until the Second World War, when they stopped the production of lead, and they were just digging the wolfenite for the molybdenum, because there was a high demand of molybdenum, you know, for this is a material for the technological steels, for the chrome molybdenum steels. And after the Second World War, they start producing for the first time the zinc. So you see, even if the same hole, the same mine was producing at the different periods, different strategic materials that were just based on the demand from the market. So, of course, the mine was closed in the 90s. The lead was not popular anymore, but we are just now rediscovering that the mining tailings, especially the zinc one, have a large amounts of germanium, which was never considered before to explore from the same mine. So, yeah, this would be just very briefly on about the minerals.
Okay, thank you for your insights, Janez. And it's great that you show us this volcanic crystal. I'm sorry that I didn't bring jaderit from our Jadar Valley from Serbia. Thank you for your speech. Now I would like to ask Michel, Cathelineau, do we have enough of minerals and resources?
Yes, thank you. Could I have the slides, please? So the new technologies, especially the energy transition, needs a lot of metals, and metals which were not exploited in the past, especially, for instance, lithium. Lithium was used in ceramics and other industrial use, but at the level of the demand, which is inferred for the next decades, it is totally new. So it is very well known. Just a few comments on this, the different energies, aeolian, photovoltaic, electric cars. Especially, I will focus on batteries. Batteries is a huge demand potential for the next decades for lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese. In the case of batteries, lithium NMC, lithium iron phosphate also for lithium. And aeolian energy, of course, we need permanent magnets, especially for the aeolian, which are offshore, and a few cars. So this is the volume, the most significant volumes. In photovoltaic panels, the volumes and masses which are involved are much less. Yeah. In a lot of medias on the web, there is the peak hole, which is put in forward. But the problem of the peak hole is that the media like to foster the fear, the fundamental fear of the humanity of scarcity. In fact, most of the calculations are wrong. If we follow this, for instance, silver would be, would be exhausted. So silver is not exhausted, of course. And most of the metals which are predicted to be exhausted within 5, 10 or 50 years will not. Just because a geological reserve, it's a proven geological availability of metals by different techniques, but also it is an economic concept, which is calculated from an economic point of view. So the availability of a metal is not only driven by the geology, but also by the economics, because we can foster the grade and decrease the grade of an ore when the price is increasing. So in that case, the reserves increased the same way. The only problem is that the availability, cannot show. The availability of a metal depends also on a lot of other parameters, such as speculation, the choice of prospect of profitability. Especially the role of bank is essential, because we could have a problem in the future if the bank do not invest sufficiently. You can see here on the right-hand side that the amount of money which is put in prospection is decreasing since a decade, but it is not correlated at all to the price of the metals. So, as it has been already said, it takes a long time, 10, 15 years before to get a metal from a mine, a new mine. So we need to invest at the moment, now. It was also indicated in the first talk. Just a concept also, the Skinner model in '76 is still in the mind. The x-axis, which is not marked here, is the grade, the ore grade. And in the mind, generally we think that what is been already mined is the richest ore, which is easy to find. And the remaining ores is still decreasing in time from volume and mass. And the concept of Skinner was to consider that the mineralogical barrier exists in between these two slopes, in between the amount of metal which can be recuperated from low-grade ores or rocks, and the ores themselves. And it is probably not true and need to be reconsidered metal by metal. If we consider, for instance, copper, the grade of copper is decreasing and decreasing. But in fact, in the 2 last decades, the copper production has been multiplied by 2 and the reserve by 3. So there is no big effects, in fact, of decreasing due to the technology improvements. About the price, a few slides on the price. Demand and supply, of course, control the metal price. But we have to keep in mind that the price at the moment is essentially controlled by half of the demand, which comes from Asia, especially China. So the price of the metals is mostly controlled by the demand, and from minor problems, but which exist since the COVID, for instance. We have freight rates for transportation has increased, and also the storability of metals is sensitive to change in interest rates. So there are a lot of factors which make the different fluctuation in prices. If we take copper, for instance, we have finally a certain type of stability, because it has been increased by a factor of 4, the price of copper, due to the China demand. But finally, we are remaining since 15 years around $4 by pound, and this doesn't change too much at the moment. Contrarily to the prediction of Goldman and Sachs, which are predicting to reach $15 per pound. We have to keep in mind that the recycling is decreasing. For instance, for copper, it is in blue here in this diagram, and it is due to the fact that the demand is increasing and increasing. So the recycling cannot afford to compensate the demand. I just accelerate. The demand will decrease, for instance, in developed countries. It is the case in Japan, for instance, in the right-hand side. You see that the demand in Japan is due to the fact that most infrastructures are already available. This is not the case in the countries where the population, as already said in the first talk, continue to grow with an imbalance, incredible imbalance between the rural population and the city dwellers. Even if the world population decreased after 2060, the demand is increasing so for decades. And this could control a great part of the availability of metals. Just to finish, a few words. Technology has increased, and progress and improvements have increased the availability of metals on the planet, especially the heap leaching. For instance, for uranium, in situ recovery makes very easy to make profit with very low-grade ores, contrary to high-grade ores in Canada, for instance. This is Kazakhstan. And for uranium, for instance, the two slopes you have seen in the Skinner diagram is not valid, as we can decrease progressively the grade of the ores down to maybe the amount of uranium in the water. We can use uranium from the seawater. So just a very quick conclusions. Resource and reserve depend mainly of economy. Geology and technology resolved in the past most of the challenges. And I like very much the Hendrik's sentence, pick arguments resurface over and over because they seem intuitively plausible and play on humanity's fundamental fear of scarcity. But we have to take into account that we have to encourage co-processing of several metals, to have a complete exploitation of a site, as already said. To exploit only one metal is not convenient at the moment. And we have to increase the rate of recovery and recycling, of course. And this must be done within a general concept of the society at large, especially involving, since the beginning of a mining project, all the stratumant of the society, including NGOs, all the mining, the national governments, mining territory governance, and so on. So this is a very important point, because all the mining prospects which are closed at the moment are generally closed by social fears. So it's very...
Thank you for this talk that shows us what are the most important constraints for availability of raw materials, in this case metals. And then I'm interested. Then I would like to ask Marc, Henrio, to tell us more about the influence of mining industry on the about the environmental impacts of mining industry, and which actions are undertaken by the mining sector to mitigate some negative impacts.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Just, yeah, putting the slides on. So, yeah, indeed, so as any industry, the mining industry has environmental negative impacts. So I'm going to just introduce you a bit what are those impacts and how can miners mitigate them. So as we already mentioned, actually, like to give you a quick overview of what's the state of the industry today regarding the environmental impacts and the challenges they have. I think that miners have actually a double challenge to address. So first, as we just mentioned, demand will be booming for some minerals and metals. So not only battery metals, for example, we've heard a lot of nickel, lithium, and so on. But there's not only those. And for example, copper, as you can see on the left, that is pretty much used in every technology. So it can be, low carbon energy generation, digital technologies. We expect that the demand will double actually in the next 30 years with a 2.3 CAGR growth. So coming back to the point that was mentioned in the first session is basically saying that we're going to mine what in the next 30 years what we have mined since the beginning of humanity. And so of course that puts a lot of tension on the supply side, so on miners. And that's why we already see a likely 20% gap between copper demand and supply in 2030. So this is challenging on itself, and at the same time, miners need to become more sustainable and reach net zero actually in this time frame, so in the next 30 years. And this is challenging because of three main points. So this is an extremely fast pace that is required for miners in an industry that is rather conservative and has usually long lead times that will, as we mentioned, at least 10 to 15 years to open new operations. Second, significant investments are needed because, for example, to decarbonize operations, huge investments are required, and this will imply actually arbitrage versus other investments, such as developing new projects. And so here, actually, the difficulty is not to oppose sustainability and profitability. And next, miners need to adapt operations from the new climate change threats that we actually already see, but that are intensifying, as we know. So it can be extreme heat waves, flooding, water scarcity, depending on the regions. So this is as well an extremely pressing matter that miners must tackle. And actually, as challenging as it looks like, it's also, I think, a great opportunity for the mining industry that is often seen as a dirty one, to switch the narrative and become a cleaner industry. And this will actually tremendously benefit all the other industries and downstream sectors by providing low carbon and sustainable materials. Looking at the environmental actual impacts of mining. So globally, regarding CO2 emissions, mining is emitting 1% of global emissions regarding Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So for those not familiar, Scope 1 is the direct emissions of the companies, so mainly in mining actually from diesel burn. And the Scope 2 is coming from power generation, so electricity generation. What you can see actually on the blue area on the diamond chart on the left. So this is Scope 1 and 2, representing 1% of CO2 emissions globally. If you add on top the fugitive methane emissions that are occurring during coal mining, it makes up between 4 and 7% of the greenhouse gases equivalent emissions. And actually, as you can see on the right diamond chart, the majority of the emissions are coming from downstream, so what we call Scope 3. For power generation in coal-fired plants, so again coal, and for metals production, so mainly steel making using coke in blast furnaces, so again coal. However, there's a lot to do, huge improvements in the mining and processing part, so what's in the blue area, because to give you an order of magnitude, as you may know, in typical open pit mining operations, the rock is blasted, then it's loaded in some trucks. The truck is hauling the material to the processing plant. And this kind of truck, for example, the one in the picture, typically has a payload of 200 tons of material and has a burning rate of 150 liters of diesel per hour. So, I mean, that's not like a common car, right? And I just, to give you another order of magnitude, the global mining truck fleet is consuming approximately the same as we burn every year in France, diesel and gasoline combined, so which is around 50 billion liters of fuel. So this is huge, and there's a lot to do on that to reduce the emissions. Then, moving closer to the mine itself, there's also, some local impacts, local negative impacts. So those are not new in the mining industry, right? So, but here are the main ones. So water consumption, we already mentioned in the first session that this is a really pressing matter. So water management and recycling rates of water in the operations. Actually, 30 to 50% of the mineral reserves are located in high or extreme water stress areas. So that's an extremely important matter. And as we need to ramp up the production, I mean, for example, in some regions like Chile, where water is like in a super stressed area, I mean, we cannot mine twice the copper because we just don't have twice the water. Second is waste and tailings management. So there's waste rock and tailings after processing that are produced during mining. So those need to be disposed and has like potential safety or toxicity issues. Then you've got biodiversity. So often mines are located actually in remote areas in biodiversity hotspots. So the impacts on ecosystems can be deforestation, air pollution, dust, vibrations with machinery movements. And like, again, 50% of the mining reserves are located in the most biodiversity sensitive areas. So this is something that miners really need to tackle to develop new operations. And all those impacts I just mentioned are also impacting like local communities. So this is not new again, but communities are maybe more aware and cautious and demanding on those impacts to be limited by mining companies, and that they should bring as well positive impacts, such as, you know, employment, development programs like education. And there's also already some initiatives that exist to tackle those issues, but it's maybe as a whole for the industry not moving fast enough. Going back to the CO2 emissions, what are actually the levers that miners can use to decarbonize operations? So as you can see on this slide, there's 3 main groups of levers. So 5 types in 3 groups. The first group would be in the direct control of miners regarding scope 1 and 2 emissions. So it would be operational efficiency, switch to more sustainable fuels, and in the mid to long term, switch to alternative drivetrain for mobile equipment. So it could be electric vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles in some cases. Then you've got the scope 2 buckets. So it's partially in the control of miners because they cannot, you know, control the carbon intensity of the electric grid of the country they're operating in, but they can actually invest in low carbon production means on site. And the last one regarding scope 3 is depending on the supply chain players. So miners can play on sustainable sourcing actually, for example, to source low carbon consumables, for example, explosives. And broadening a bit the solution space, just like, of course, a mine will never be without negative impacts, even in the future. But here is a snapshot of what should be the aspiration of the sustainable mine in the future. First, as I just mentioned, miners need to decarbonize and switch to green power. This is the first step to drastically reduce their scope 2 emissions. And so this is already happening. For example, the company just built, recently built the biggest solar plant in Brazil to power its operation. In Australia, in the Pilbara region, there's like a hub with solar and windmill plants with high voltage lines, networks, and battery storage to power the mines in a green and efficient way. So at the same time, miners need to electrify, to start and accelerate electrification actually. So of the mobile equipment, as I just mentioned, trucks, but not only, all the equipment basically, to offset the scope 1 emissions, so from diesel burns. So it can be electric vehicles, hydrogen-powered, pantograph systems, so this is basically tramway system for trucks. Can be also other technologies, such as conveyor belts. Third, they need, while tackling those decarbonization on site, they could also expand alongside the value chain to broaden their effort. So that's what we call green business building. It can be upstream, for example, in producing green explosives or low carbon explosives, or downstream, for example, developing green shipping corridors. For digitalization and automation will bring actually significant efficiency gains in the mining space. Can be up to 20–30% in some mines. And this will actually also improve the working conditions. But on the other hand, it will also, lower the job opportunities for communities. So this is one of the reasons why miners need to become more and more like communities trusted partners. So they need to really put effort in that by having like positive impacts and having an impeccable sustainable track record if they want to develop new projects in the future. 6, land use should be optimized, so it can be additional green power generation, it can be developing carbon sinks, for example. And finally, to close the loop, miners should invest in recycling to provide more low carbon products, but that's a topic that will be detailed right after me. So yeah, just to close my presentation, a bit of advertisement of what we do. So we regularly publish on our websites in the metals and mining space, especially in sustainability these days. So feel free to have a look on our recent articles and reach out if you have any questions regarding that to my team or myself. And only for those that are not attending the conference in the next 2 days, we are holding a webinar on the market outlook on the materials transition if you are interested. So thank you for listening, and yeah, I'm handing back to you.
Okay, thank you for this talk on how the mining industry is active in carbon footprint reduction, and now we already mentioned that we are facing the resource scarcity, and that limited availability of resources will affect the material demand for the twin transition. And my question for you, Chen, is what are the strategies that can secure material demand for green transitions?
Should I answer now? Should I answer now?
What are the strategies?
Yeah. So yeah, I will use my slides to answer these questions. So yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of strategies could help to reduce the demand, but I think only focusing on the demand, that's not enough. So maybe sometimes we also need to consider some recyclings. But is recycling necessary and sufficient? Then yeah, we have to think about more. So to answer this question, is recycling efficient and necessary and sufficient? Then we have to know how many materials we need for the green transitions. So for the presentation today, I want to use some cases in the transportation to show you how the green transitions in the transport will influence the metal cycle. So you could see that an electrical car will require more demands for the copper, lithium, nickel, graphite, and other materials compared with the conventional car. But these raw materials are not distributed evenly. So most of their these critical material production are concentrated in several countries, and the situation for EU, that's very bad, because the EU's raw materials for green transitions highly depend on several countries like China, Brazil, South Africa, Chile, et al. So, and here I use cobalt as an example. This Zaki diagram shows the cobalt cycle, including mining, refining, manufacturing, use, waste management, and recycling. And we can easily see that currently the secondary supply only accounts for a small fraction, and a lot of cobalt wastes are not effectively recycled. So, sorry. So to answer your questions, I think this slide shows something there. So how to secure the material demand for green transitions? We have to think about strategies from two sides. So on the one hand, we have to think about strategies to reduce the demand, so such as extending product lifetime, reducing the material intensity by advanced technologies, lowering the prospective product stocks by improving the stock efficiency. And on the other hand, we have to think about strategies to improve the supply. So for example, improving the recycling rates, improving the primary production, and also exploring overseas mining. So for the transport, if we want to explore the sustainable pathway for the transport, then we have to know how the historical development evolves. So we identified 5 modes through the historical development of the car and bicycle ownership per capita in 60 countries during 1962 to 2015. And we identified 5 modes. Among these 5 modes, we found the most sustainable pathway is like Denmark and Netherlands with the very high bicycle ownership, and the unsustainable pathway is like Spain and the United States with the very high car ownership per capita. So for the countries in Model 1 and Model 2, like India and China, we should try to avoid the unsustainable Model 3 and Model 4, and we should go directly to sustainable Model 5. But actually, the car transition, that's very complex. So except for the number of car fleets, a lot of transitions need to be considered in car sectors. So such as the shared cars, ride-hailing, electrical vehicles, and also improving the closed-loop recycling rates. So we develop an integrated framework to systematically quantify how various strategies will influence the metal cycle and also the carbon emissions. So as you can see, we incorporated the energy supply with the car full life cycle, and also we considered both demand-oriented strategies and technology-oriented strategies. So here I just show the secondary supply and the demand under 9 extreme scenarios. So using the S1 scenarios with the high demand and no technology as a starting point, if you observe the results from top to down, and you could see the demand-oriented strategies will reduce the demand significantly. And when you observe the results from left to right, and you could see the development of the technologies will drive a lot of demand for the battery materials and also the lightweight materials. And also when we compare the secondary supply and demand, we could see the secondary supply could not satisfy the material demand in the car sectors. And also for the battery materials, those battery materials are not only used in batteries, they are also utilized in other applications. So here I used cobalt as examples. You could see the cobalt are used in both emerging end uses and also some traditional end uses like battery for consumer electronics, superalloy, magnets, et al. So here you could see also see the demand and secondary supply of the cobalt under different scenarios, and you could easily see the advanced LFP battery technology will alleviate the cobalt demands greatly. And we could also see the recycling could increase the secondary supply of cobalts, which also could alleviate the cobalt supply risks. But still, the cobalt supply shortages appears inevitable in the short to medium term. So even though in the very optimistic scenarios, and also, I want to mention that the battery technologies may lead to some material trade-offs. So, here you can see the developments of the high nickel and low cobalt battery technologies. They could alleviate the cobalt supply risks, but they will, increase by the nickel demands. And the advanced LFP batteries will reduce the demand for cobalt and nickel, so it will not shift the burden from the cobalt to other metals. And also another thing I want to mention is that the second life of the batteries will it is not good for the material circularity, but it's very good for the environmental impacts. So how to effectively and also environmentally recycle the batteries should get more attention to see how to balance the supply issues and also the environmental issue. But how much can recycling do to alleviate the material supply pressure? So here, this case shows that, so in the inefficient recycling, we could see that the recycling could only account for a small fraction of the material demand for the new batteries. But in the efficient recycling situation, the recycling could account for, could contribute more, but still, most of the recycled materials could only account for less than 70% of the material demand for the new batteries. So therefore, the recycling, that is very crucial to alleviate the material supply, but still, that's not enough to satisfy the growing battery materials. So more strategies for reducing the material supply, to reducing the material demand and increase the material supply should be tested more, considering the domestic situation. Yeah, that's all from my side.
Okay, thank you, Chen, on your nice presentation, and thanks for clarifying the role of recycling in supply of raw materials. And now I would like to ask Kerstin to tell us more about the potentials of recycling and of course circular economies.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's see, my slides will come up. So my name is Kerstin Forsberg, and I'm working at the Department of Chemical Engineering at KTH. So I will talk a little bit more on the technical side. So let's see, will my phone be made of scrap? That's the question. So as we all know now, of course, we need a lot of metals for all the items that we use every day. And we source these from extraction from the minerals. But today, now, I will talk a little bit more about the recycling and how we can get back the metals from recycling. So this is just one example of a phone, and you can see all the critical raw materials needed for various parts of this phone. But as we heard this morning also, of course, there is a lot of more raw materials needed in the production of this phone. Was it 70 kilos even? But this is just one example of what you can find in the phone, and comparing this recycling of the phones with the resourcing from the minerals, of course, some of these elements are present at very low concentration or lower than in the ores, but some of them are present at much higher concentration. Also, the composition is different. You have plastic details, and it's a little bit complex to find a process to recycle the phones and all these valuable elements. It's a nice challenge for us in chemical engineering, but we also need to collaborate with other disciplines, of course. And we can start by using the same approaches as we already do in hydrometallurgy and processing of the ores. But there are also new innovations, of course, that we can have in this part. For example, there is a French company I've heard about who had a very good idea of how to delaminate and disintegrate this type of equipments, and they have now a very innovative idea, and they can produce very good concentrates, and they are very competitive in this way. So there is a lot of innovation, obviously, and a lot of new processes to develop to recover all these valuable elements. Looking at the batteries, lithium-ion batteries are very common, of course, both in the phones, but also in vehicles. And here are just some examples of cathode materials. Another challenge in recycling is, of course, that the batteries are always under development, and there are new battery chemistries coming in. And you have to also consider that when you think about how much you will develop in the recycling processes. And you have to have perhaps some flexibility, for example, for the processing of NMC materials, where you go from chemistries with less cobalt in the future. And now the car companies and battery recyclers, they partner up to be able to see how they can supply with the battery materials needed. And there is a lot of development, as you can see. Many companies in America and Europe, for example, are already recycling or are planned to recycle lithium-ion batteries. And there is also the production of lithium and nickel is increasing to help with this demand. No, the next one. Yeah, okay. And there are, of course, also drivers to develop the recycling of the lithium-ion batteries that are important. We will need a lot of more batteries in the future, and then we have the batteries regulation proposal that is very important, that will give some targets for the recyclers to see what they should achieve in these recycling processes being developed. And looking at lithium-ion batteries and recycling of those, what you do is first that you just shred them and you produce this type of black mass. You can do this in different ways, so the composition of the black mass can be very different depending on upstream treatment of the batteries. So it's just an example of a very complex material to process. That is what we are looking at, we who work in hydrometallurgy, how to develop efficient processes to get back the valuable elements from this very complex black mass that you can see here. There are many, many good challenges in that, and it's not obvious how to do. This is just one overview of how you could think when you recycle your lithium-ion batteries. So you start with the black mass. There is leaching, often sulfuric acid, but there are also other research on other solvents to use instead. Then you have to combine different unit operations for the purification and separation of the metals and components. For example, you can focus on the solvent extraction, ion exchange, and precipitation, and you combine these unit operations to build your process. And then towards the end, you have the recovery, which is crystallization, precipitation, or using electrometallurgy to end up with the final product that it could be a metal salt or it could be a metal. And here it's very important also to think what should be the output from our process. What do the market needs? Is it the metal, or is it a salt of cobalt, nickel, and manganese together, or should we separate these elements into separate salts? What should we do in our recycling process? So it's very difficult to know, and we have to discuss among people with different disciplines to understand what should be done. And then we have already heard today a little bit that the big volumes to recycle are not yet available potentially, and also because we need so many batteries, recycling is obviously not enough to get all the materials needed. I also want to say that I am working at the university. I educate people in chemical engineering, which is very important to be able to develop these type of recycling processes when they perhaps end up in industry or in other places. But we also have to remember to teach the students how to put their knowledge into a context and how to be able to collaborate among different disciplines, because it's very important that we can do that to be able to achieve all of what we have to achieve within this green transition. Yeah. So I think I will change slide. Yep. Yes, the two conferences that we are organizing on this topic, more on the technical side, if you're interested in battery recycling and in particular crystallization, which is a very important unit operation in the recycling of batteries and other items. Yep, thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Kerstin, on your final work. And I also would like to thank all of you on your overview on the importance of the critical materials for the twin transition. Now the time is for the question and answers by the audience. Yes, please.
Thank you. My question is for Kerstin and maybe also for Vu. So very rightly said that the recyclable material is not able to substantially provide us materials for what is needed in the exponential growth of especially electric vehicles and such material applications. What is, however, good, and this Vu explained in the last year's conference, that with electric vehicles, the batteries are so big that it is now possible to recover most of these materials from such batteries, which is not possible with the small electronics because they just lose in the landfill. The thing that, however, is great now is that we have more predictability to demand also from the electrification targets and also from regulation demanding recyclable materials there. And that kind of gives, from an industry side, a much more definitive view of where this is going in terms of demand for recyclability or demand for recyclable materials. Now, what is interesting, however, also from industry side, is that we started from independent providers getting into recycling. First offshoots were former employees of Tesla. Then we also heard today that Northvolt is investing heavily into recycling. So I see that as a second layer or meso layer. And the latest is from yesterday, Glencore, the giant of mining, getting into large-scale recycling. The question really is, who is best equipped and who is best for the solution at large? Which is the layer that should be getting into recycling as per you? Thank you.
Sorry,
for me, which is
Kerstin, would you like to answer this question?
What was the layer of the question again, please? This.
Independent providers, battery manufacturers, car or battery manufacturers, or now we get the giants of mining also getting into it.
Yeah, I think we all have to collaborate. I think it's very important we have all these actors, and the most important thing I think is just to bring the actors together to discuss and to make the whole value chain work. I think so, and there is a lot of different examples, I guess, of how to do that, but I would say that. So anyone wants to add to this? Yeah.
Yes, maybe just to add the fact that recycling is working if we are able to collect and to selectively collect. This is not very well organized at the European scale at the moment. For instance, at the moment, in the collect points, you get batteries from everything from bicycle and so on. They are all mixed, and they are not the same composition. So I think that regulation by the states, by Europe, is absolutely necessary if you want to increase the efficiency of the recycling. This is a major point.
Hi, thank you very much for your comments. I think there are two issues that I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Anyone can take that, respond to that. One is the fact that when we design a cell phone or a battery or any of these materials, they're designed for use and not designed to be able to take them apart and properly, effectively recycle the components. So we end up with tramp elements that are very difficult to remove. For example, iron and aluminum, copper and iron. Could you comment on that, please, and the need for changing the way we design components and manufacture components for use by the public so that when end of life comes around, we can separate the components in those cell phones or cars or batteries to make them more congenial, more appropriate for recycling.
Okay, yeah, I could comment on that. I should have said that because I was thinking also to say exactly what you are saying, that design for recycling is very, very important, and I can only agree on that. And also I think so traceability is important and comes in here to be able to track and to, yeah. So both design for recycling and traceability, I would say. Anyone wants to add? Yeah.
If I can a bit comment on that, right? So the producers of phones, cars, batteries are companies that are interested in profit, right? They're not interested in well-being of the planet. Yes, they are, but more in profit, right? So some time ago, I'm working on the institute, and we had a big joint project with one of the car manufacturers. We started the project on developing some magnets, you know, so it's complicated. And after some time, the car company withdrew from the project, right? They were not interested anymore. And one of the representatives of the company was visiting us, and he explained it to us why they stopped the project. It looked very nice for at least for me, like worth of investigation and everything. And he said, like, we're a shareholder company, right? We are owned by our shareholders, and they're interested if this will bring some money in 10, 20, 30 years, right? I mean, we are a car producing company. If we would be a scientific company, we would not remove the water from the windshield with a piece of rubber, you know, in the year 2000, right? There are more methods, more appropriate methods, but they will not make turnover for the companies. So what you're suggesting is, yes, of course, I mean, to take the design into how to recycle, and that this would benefit to the world. It's a very socialistic approach, you know. So, but maybe we need that. So, thank you.
Yes. Sorry, a follow-up. Is this an area where we need public policy and legislation to force companies to incorporate recycling in design?
I mean, I think that just recently it happened, right, with this legislation for the Apple phones that they have to be serviceable. So already this is a big step forward, right? So we can repair them. We are allowed to repair them.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I would have a general one, and you all spoke a little bit about that point. And some with whom I work on a regular basis know it's a bit of an obsession for me. But you didn't go that deep in this project. And it's a bit of a follow-up question from Hani. I mean, Hani was speaking about the product. I will be speaking about the materials. So as a materials scientist, we are discovering new materials, using them in another context, etc. And there is a science called materials by design. And in this, we're trying to avoid the byproducts because 61% of the elements have a level of companionability of more than 50%. Michel, Janez, you all spoke a little bit about this point. And my question is, do you think as a material scientist, I should definitely stop using them? Do you think there is a solution to the byproduct question? Are there any issues? What are your thoughts about this point? I mean, what should we do as material scientists with the byproducts?
Who's going to answer this one?
I mean, I can start with this, right? So I mean, in the past 100 years, you know, there are different materials that are super nice, right? But they are not good for the people or for the environment, right? 100 years ago, like asbestos was like wonder material. It was basically everywhere. And huge mining operations were started to dig the mineral out. But in the past 20, 30 years, it's just by the regulation is forbidden to use it, right? So big step forward. But from the researcher point of view, this is really good material, right? So the other such example maybe we have also in Slovenia, right? We have the second largest mercury deposit in the world. So we were extracting it for 500 years. But here suddenly there was no demand for the mercury anymore. So the mining stopped, but we have a legacy of 500 years of mineral waste around it. So it's a more philosophical question. Yeah, I mean, material, it's very nice, but some materials should just not be used, yes.
Yes, it's a good question. I take always the example of the cobalt. In French territories, in New Caledonia, it's the fourth producer of nickel in the world. And there is a ratio of 1/10 between cobalt and nickel. There is 10 times more nickel than cobalt. And only a few % of this is exploited just because the hydrometallurgy is not developed. Due to difficulties in financing new plants, hydrometallurgy, for instance, the Goro plant cost around $8 billion. So, of course, it's an investment. But now the Goro plant is making money with Tesla, selling a component which is a mix between nickel and cobalt. So that means that it is possible. But the cobalt is lost in all the other mines. So this is a great problem. I think it's not a reasonable exploitation to let the cobalt lost. And it's generality. You were talking about gallium, for instance, I've seen in your slides. Gallium is just a byproduct of aluminum. I have no fear that we would have problems in the future about gallium. It's just a matter of developing the technology everywhere where we are mining bauxite to get the gallium, even if the grade is lower than in other deposits. So there is not a problem of availability, as I said. It's a problem of the price we want or we could accept to pay to get this metal. But the problem is to waste a lot of ores. If the ores which are not exploited today because of problem of profitability, I think what is reasonable is store them properly for the next future generations. And there is a lot to do in that field, and probably it must help again by regulation.
Maybe a bit of a follow-up question is that you spoke about the extraction, but also they are very poorly recycled. So it's maybe some other would would have a comment on that. Do we have a chance to recycle more those very rare and critical metals, such as platinoids, rare earths, etc.? Today, they are not recycled. Is there any hope on that?
Chen, would you like to answer on this one?
Yes. So I would say, yeah. So no matter for what kind of questions, we do need a integrated model, because on that one, then we could, so because sometimes we are talking about extraction, sometimes we are talking about recycling, but actually those flows are linked together, but maybe at different time, because there are always some temporal delay from the use to recycling. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I could use a solid and integrated framework to, put everything together, no matter for the material flows, the technology flows, or the economic flows, because under that framework, we could definitely, we could see how those flows in different process. And then finally, it depends on our targets. So if, for example, before the lithium recycling, that doesn't make sense because it cannot make profits. But the recent years, the price for the lithium increased by a lot. Then at this time, recycling, the companies would, recycle the lithium more. So everything is dynamic, but the framework, that's the same. So we should put everything in the solid and the integrated framework, and then we set our target there, and then we decide, okay, what kind of option we should choose. Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. Are there any questions? Yes. Okay, Janez.
Maybe just to point out, right, that if we would achieve like theoretical recycling of 100% of some material like aluminum, or then without mining the primary ore, sometimes we will lose access to some elements, right? For instance, there's no mine for indium, just indium. These are side products. Without the primary production of digging for zinc, we lose some elements that are what our technology is based on. So luckily we don't have 100% recycling, and the mining will always be here and we will need it, right?
Thank you, Janez. Okay. Yes, Michel, please.
To say something more about indium. Indium and germanium are side products of zinc. And the main problem, I think, with these metals is the fact that the mine company is selling a zinc concentrate, and then a metallurgist is buying this concentrate. But in fact, if he has not the network of buyers, it prefers to just produce zinc, because there is an investment in making a new cycle in the hydrometallurgical plant. So the problem is the fact that each company is making his own for the profitability. It's the problem of our economic system. And each company is independent. And at the moment, there is a little bit of regulation, but not so much. So in fact, change are difficult to imagine at the moment if no regulation is set up, because of the profitability for each individual company. So it's a big problem. It's our system.
I think we have a question of one of our students, Anton.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Alexander. I saw a couple of diagrams about criticality of different materials throughout your speech, and one said that cobalt and lithium that we use for batteries are most critical, and while the last presentation, I think, stated that indium and gallium are most critical. So, and I find here a contradiction between, so my question is there any standard procedure to assess the criticality of materials, and how this procedure is implemented in industrial scale?
Kerstin, please.
I can start, and I could say that for example here in EU we have the critical raw materials that have been identified by the European Commission that are critical for us in our region here, and there are similar lists, I guess, for other regions in the world, depending on the availability, the supply and demand of these. So if there is, they are critical if there is, we really need them, but at the same time there is a risk that we can't get access to them as we want, and then all of these are critical raw materials, and the ones that you mentioned are just a few on this list that you can find. So cobalt and lithium are on the list. They are critical for us, but there are also many other elements on this list of critical and strategic raw materials. Anyone wants to add?
And just to add, yeah, I think there's no standard approach on that, on the criticality assessment. For example, you know, we've discussed before, there's a methodology from the World Materials Forum, for example, there's one from the French Geological Survey. I've seen some, it depends actually the region you're scoping. And for example, I've seen as well in some companies, internal mapping, so it really depends what you're focusing on in terms of regions or countries, and also eventually applications or sectors.
Yeah, to banalize a bit, right? So what is critical, maybe very critical, is like oxygen and water and food, right? But like it depends on what, it's more a political decision and what kind of way of life we want to have. Like we heard in the opening talk that like, yeah, we can live very sustainable, like in the way in the Middle Ages, right? So this EU list of critical materials, it's a list that Europe needs for the defense, for the transport, for its industry, and what it envisions that it's critical for the Europe. But yes, each company, it's on their own, and they have to secure their own materials that they can operate.
Would you like to add something? Yeah. But so, shortly, because...
Okay, then yeah, I think for the procedure to assess the criticality, I cannot answer this question from the industry level, but from the academia level, we do have some metrics to assess the criticality, and I think it's sometimes I think. Some people think the lithium and cobalt was more critical. Some people think that the indium or gallium are critical. I think that depends on what kind of scenario they develop. Because, you know, when we talk about the criticalities, one important thing is about the demand. And the one important thing that's about the supply. So it depends what kind of scenario. So for example, before we talk about a lot of things about the cobalt or nickel, because that depends on the battery technology. But now, or recently, the sodium batteries get more attentions. So maybe this could solve those material shortage problems and all, if the sodium batteries could develop commercially. So I think it depends on what kind of scenario currently and how the technology develop dynamically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chen. Now I would like to close this session and to thanks to our panelists on their great discussion, as well as to the audience for their activism, and so thank you very much.
And I would like to thank the chairwoman of this session, because she didn't thank herself. Well, we are almost on schedule. Thank you very much. And the next step is the lunch, because we're in France. So that we have 1 hour and 20 minutes. During the lunch, we'll have a few pitch from our industrial partners who are here, and you will have time to discuss with them. But I don't want to take you more time. So you'll just follow us. It's on the main, the lunch is at the main building, and you should come back here at 2:30 for the next section on the green industry with Uroš. Okay, bon appétit.